YouTube, with the Minnesota Timberwolves being eliminated 4-1 in the NBA Western Conference Finals in 2024 by the Dallas Mavericks. I want to talk about maybe what went wrong in that series. I want to overview their season as a whole. I want to talk about what the issues are with this team. Obviously a Western Conference Finals team is going to have very few compared to the rest of the league, but what can the Minnesota Timberwolves do realistically moving forward to get back to the Western Conference Finals and improve their team on the margins as, their core is intact? Anthony Edwards, Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, if in fact that will be the core moving forward. What does their offseason look like, right? Like, what can the Minnesota Timberwolves do? Draft picks, things like that, everything involved. We're going to get into it in this video, a deep dive on the Minnesota Timberwolves offseason, what their biggest needs are and how they can address them. What's next for the Minnesota Timberwolves, folks? Let's talk about it. So, first of all, just big round of applause silently, because I don't want the mic to pick up the clapping, but silent round of applause for the Minnesota Timberwolves, like legitimately, because this team really turned their culture and franchise around this season. They've been knocking on the door of a legitimate Western Conference contender for a couple years, but realistically, this team made it further than I thought they could going into the season. Anthony Edwards has become a premier superstar in this league, a top 10 player in the league, no doubt about it. That is your franchise player, and with guys like Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert supporting him, you make it all the way to the Western Conference Finals. You defeat the defending champion Denver Nuggets in 7 games, and even though you lose 4-1 to the Mavs, I thought the series would be closer personally, but you still have to be thrilled as a Minnesota Timberwolves fan with this result, and maybe you bank on Anthony Edwards to get even better next season, which sounds insane because the guy's a top 10 player already, but Anthony Edwards only being 22 years old leading this team to the Western Conference Finals is no small feat and should be celebrated league-wide. As far as players' performances concerned in the Western Conference playoffs for the Timberwolves this season, I thought everyone, for the most part, they're obviously players aren't going to play their best every single game, that's just not reality, but for the most part, I thought the Minnesota Timberwolves coaching staff in Chris Finch was monumental in getting everything he could out of this team. Everyone did their job as they were told and were supposed to for the most part, right? We'll get into some of that in a little bit, but really unfortunate for Chris Finch to have to, sit behind the second row of the team because of that injury he sustained in the playoffs. It's really, really sad because as a coach, I can imagine he was just devastated of having to sit back there. While you do have faith in your assistant to be able to manage the team, or else you wouldn't be your assistant, it's got to be devastating for him to, lose that control of the team and stuff like that. So maybe that did play a bigger factor than people realize, Chris Finch not being able to run up and down the sidelines and coach the team properly. But like I said, just big props to Minnesota and everything they did this season to turn their franchise around. But as far as the issue with this team, I don't think it's one that is easily fixable, right? I think it could be, right? But I don't think it's as simple as one guy needs to perform better in the playoffs as people think. People really gave Rudy Gobert a ton of hate and criticism, a lot of it unnecessary in my opinion for the playoffs. Again, Rudy Gobert is a player that just isn't an offensive problem as an opposing team, right? And we know that about Rudy Gobert. He's not able to take advantage of mismatches often where, you can put a smaller guy on him and it really won't matter at the end of the day other than maybe in the rebounding department. But people were really upset with Rudy Gobert, thinking that he's a regular season merchant and stuff like that. I think that's pretty ridiculous. The guy is one of the greatest defenders of my lifetime, and 4-time DPOY, even including this season, being the anchor of the best defense in the NBA, being a big part of Minnesota's identity and what they want to do. I think people are way too hard on Rudy Gobert. I don't think he played his best a lot of times in this playoffs, but listen, who does, right? Who is a perfect player? They want him to be perfect, and it's just kind of unfair. I think Rudy Gobert, for the most part, did what he was asked to in every series. And listen, man, Rudy Gobert is not some, paint monster offensively. He's not going to get 20 points a game and, be a offensive nightmare, matchup like Embiid or Jokic. That's what people want because they see his salary, they see maybe some of his past playoff runs with Utah, and they think, oh, this guy's just, he's unplayable in the playoffs and he's not worth all that money and stuff like that. I think that's ridiculous. I think, Rudy Gobert, like I said, for the most part, did what he was asked. This guy, you know what you're getting in Rudy Gobert. We know that he's not going to be some unstoppable force offensively in the paint. For a big man, it's just not his game, right? And so the Timberwolves don't expect him to do that, right? At times he can be a little, less aggressive than maybe you'd like with mismatches and things like that, but for the most part, I think Rudy Gobert was just fine and did everything he was supposed to in the playoffs. Now, so like I said, it's not just as simple as Rudy Gobert needs to play better or Cat needs to hit, these big shots, right? I think the issue with this team, the clear issue throughout the playoffs, was the Wolves just straight up need a secondary ball handler that's, competent offensively to take a secondary scoring role. Karl-Anthony Towns is great at that second option. He's a dynamic offensive, mismatch nightmare, best big man shooter maybe I've ever seen, especially from behind the arc. We know he's a dynamic dynamic shooter and offensive talent. He's generational type big man talent offensively. I thought he was pretty good in the playoffs, you know, maybe got a little cold at certain stretches throughout the playoffs, but I think he did pretty well. He is a good second option, right? But I think the Wolves really need, like I said, a secondary ball handler offensively as your second option. You know, they really only had 3 capable ball handlers, and, you know, one of them is Kyle Anderson, and he is an impactful player on defense and hustle plays. He's just a dog, right? You like Kyle Anderson's a really good role player, but you really want that guy to be handling the ball, you know, when Anthony Edwards needs a rest, or it can't just be Ant, you know. And Mike Conley is a great veteran point guard stabilizer connector for that team, but at the end of the day, man, he's an older player, and while he is a really great, you know, stabilizing point guard for that team in a lot of ways, he's just not the offensive player, you know, scorer that you kind of need as a ball handler. So like I said, I don't have a problem with any of these players individually. I just think, you know, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Kyle Anderson, and Mike Conley are being asked to do things that, you know, that's not their game, right? Like, they're being asked to be in a role that's maybe a little bit bigger than them, and that's why the Wolves struggled offensively a lot of times in this playoffs. And to be honest, like I said, I think, you know, a guy that can either be the 3 or the 2 on this team that can, you know, really take a lot of ball handling pressure off Ant, especially in big moments, you know, it's just going to be in Ant's hands every single time. And, you know, he's just, you know, you can't do it alone, right, as a ball handler. So the Wolves need a secondary ball handler. There were times throughout the playoffs, man, where they just looked like totally out of sync. Ant looks so gassed and exhausted toward the end of games a lot of times for having to handle the ball, set up the teammates, make all the shots, right, and carry the offense every single possession. You know, he's 22, he's not an older guy, so he's able to do that for a while throughout games. But at the end of the day, man, you just need help as a ball handler, right? You see a lot of times with these heliocentric offenses, like James Harden in Houston comes to mind. By the time the playoffs were, you know, coming around and Harden's asked to step up as a 36 points a game scorer, it's just like he can't handle the ball for 48 minutes and do all that stuff offensively. So I see kind of a similar thing here. I think, you know, there were times throughout certain games where it's like Ant is just taking up the ball. He's, you know, setting, you know, all the pick and roll actions and carrying the offense, and then, you know, trying to set up a 3-point shooter, get the ball inside to one of the bigs, or just, you know, pulling up from mid-range or 3. He needs a break sometimes, man. You know, I've talked about this with Steph Curry and the similar thing there. You know, these guys just need a break, right? Look at Tatum and Brown in Boston, and they're a great 2-man punch. Even Dallas in, you know, Luka and Kyrie, you see, like, my turn, your turn. You know, you can take pressure off your best player as a ball handler by putting another one around him to be able to, you know, take that offensive burden off his hands for stretches of the game. And it needs to be someone more competent offensively as a scorer than Kyle Anderson, Mike Conley, or Alexander Walker. You know, Alexander Walker didn't shoot the 3 well this playoff run, and he's a great defender and a versatile role player. I really like Alexander Walker, but he's just not a guy that you can ask to take 5 threes a game and knock him down at a 36% clip. Same with Kyle Anderson. He's not a shooter, and he's just not a threat from the outside at all. I think he's a really good player. I think all these guys are good players, but you just need a better second option as a ball handler offensively. Now, as far as the Wolves' options in the offseason, that is the thing they need to attack, right? The problem is they have the highest payroll in the league, and that's not really changing next year. Your only options are going to be through the draft and for a veteran minimum contract because you're over the second apron. Now, the only thing that you could do to change that is maybe get some of these big contracts off your books. The problem is the Wolves are very top heavy in terms of contracts, right? So Jaden McDaniels, I didn't even mention. I apologize. Totally skipped my mind. Jaden McDaniels is a great, you know, guy who stepped up in the postseason as the offensive player. We know him as a dynamic defensive player, all NBA caliber defender. But like I said, he's just not a great, you know, he's not a playmaker or a primary ball handler. We just know that about him. So like I said, back to the options are you draft one, you do have a first round pick, you do have a second round pick. It would have to be this year because your picks are a little scarce moving forward, or you have to get a veteran minimum, which, you know, I'm sorry to tell you, but the veteran minimum guys that, you know, are on the market aren't going to be secondary ball handler type offensive players, right? Or you can trade someone with a big contract to try to free up some room to maybe get under that second apron and be able to sign a mid-level exception. But even then, you know, your options are pretty limited. So, you know, the Minnesota Timberwolves, as far as the offseason goes, are kind of, you know, not having the best flexibility and just kind of limited in their options. So I believe that is the issue with this team. They need a guy, particularly a 2 guard or a point guard, who can come in, relieve a lot of the ball handling pressure from Anthony Edwards, be able to score the basketball and set up the offense for stretches throughout a game, right? As good as Karl-Anthony Towns is as a second option, as good as, you know, McDaniels is and has been throughout this playoff run as a third option or so, and Mike Conley as well, you know, for one, Cat's not a ball handler, and 2, those other guys just aren't of that level that you need from a secondary ball handler offensively. So you either got to trade someone with a big contract. It could be Mike Conley. It could be, you know, I wouldn't expect Rudy Gobert or Cat to be on the move. That would just be silly in my opinion. I mean, maybe if you want to get crazy crazy and really make a huge splash, you could trade Cat for one of those guys like a DeJounte Murray or someone like that. But I think that's really, really dumb if you were to do that. You don't make any giant moves with your core, with the big three, Gobert, Cat, and Edwards, right? Like I said, all the other role players are great. They're just being asked to do too much offensively, in my opinion. Naz Reid was handling the ball a lot of time. It's just, you know, these guys aren't ball handlers, right? And if you can even take the pressure off them, they are freed up to do what they actually are supposed to do, which is hit big shots, catch and shoot opportunities, get offensive rebounds, crash the board, play, you know, a lot of high energy, high effort defense and role player type things, right? So when you all of a sudden are forced to ask these guys to do a lot offensively, that takes away from what they do well. So I think you just have to keep everybody around, but I think you have to find a way to get that, you know, secondary ball handler. Unfortunately, it's going to be hard with your limited flexibility. Now, the Wolves actually do have the 27th overall pick, so maybe you like a guy that's kind of more polished than the crop that you have to draft from at 27, and they have the 37th overall pick from Memphis in the second round. But listen, man, if you can maybe pull up those picks, because this team is ready to win now. You know, as young as some of these guys are, they're ready to win now, as we saw this playoff run. They just need to do some tweaking to their balance as a roster. I think if you could pull these players and maybe Mike Conley, or I like Mike Conley, I think he's a big influence on how stable this team was. I think he just wins wherever he goes. He makes teams better, and he's an underrated player at this point in his career. But listen, man, it's just too much, right? I know Mike Conley is only going to be making about $10 million next season, but you know, if you can pull him and maybe like a Wendell Moore contract, or just, you know, I think the Wolves are only supposed to be $6 million over the second apron. So if you can, you know, pull those guys together, but the question is, can you get a player back in a trade with those and maybe the picks, or the mid-level exception player that is replacing those two players' value? That's the question. So the Wolves are in a tough spot as far as that goes, but that is the issue with this team. Everything else I think is perfect. You know, maybe they could use a little bit more shooting from, you know, the backcourt and wing position, but you know, I just think they're really, really set. But they need someone that can, you know, come in, not named Conley or Anderson, and relieve a lot of the scoring duties on the ball from Anthony Edwards. Monte Morris was an interesting, you know, pickup for them, but end up not working out the way they thought, so didn't get a lot of minutes in the playoffs. But either way, man, I'm making a big deal out of this, and it is a big deal. It's, you know, gonna determine their next season, in my opinion. That was the issue with this team this year, in my opinion. But overall, man, even if you run it back with just this squad, you have a great shot to win next season as well. You just, you know, maybe Ant gets even better in the offseason. Obviously, he probably will. He's only 22 years old. There's no way he's played his best basketball yet, which is scary for the league. But hopefully, you know, they can find this ball handler that can come in and relieve that pressure for Ant offensively. Let me know down in the comment section if you think I'm missing anything, you know, from this team as far as their issues, why they, you know, couldn't hang with Dallas in that Western Conference final. Do you think I'm, you know, giving Rudy Gobert too much credit? Do you think it was worse than I'm projecting? Look, I'm not an expert, and I don't claim to be. I'm just a guy who watches all the games, right? I'm not a coach. I've never, you know, played at that level. So make sure you guys let me know if you know more about, you know, everything going on with this team. If I'm wrong, if I'm right, let me know down in the comments. I'm always, you know, open to receiving criticism, always open to your comments. Thank you guys so much for all the support as of late. You guys have been amazing. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already, because we upload content just like this every single day on this channel. Every day, all things NBA. That's gonna be my new slogan. We're trying to build a great community, and you guys have really been, you know, helping me do that. So always feel free to comment, you know, share. Well, I love reading the comments, man. It makes me so happy, keeps me motivated, keeps me, you know, inspired to make this content for you guys. You guys are so great, man. Hopefully you guys have a great rest of your day today. Let me know down in the comment section what you think. Make sure you guys drop a like on the video. It really helps out the channel, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Stay positive, Minnesota fans. You know, you got to the conference finals, and you know, I'll never know what that feels like as a 76ers fan, evidently, because the last time the Sixers were in the conference finals was 2001. So, you know, hopefully my team next year can make it, but they won't. I'll catch you guys in the next one. This is your boy D Haven. As always, peace.